Orders, Commander.
How many times must I tell you? Mind the nerdish cap!
We are...
Oops. Well, hello, everybody. So we're trying out some new equipment today, so hopefully this improves our experience and we won't have some of the limitations we had. But with that said, welcome to the Nerdish Gap. So again, Dante has joined me. I appreciate it again, and you get to kick us off.
All right. So I wanted to start off today's show by asking you what is a show that you feel as though you've been the most hyped for over the course of its release schedule. So like every time an episode came out, you were like, oh man, I can't wait to see the next one.
Next one. So right now, currently, I mean, for a bit, it was kind of a toss-up between the Gen V and Loki, but Loki kind of wins right now. So, I mean, Gen V has had some pretty decent twists and everything, but I think it's just a little bit more predictable. What's interesting for both, I think part of what hooks me for both of them is that the bigger impact. So Gen V clearly has a real big impact on the boys universe and everything.
Oh, yeah.
And Loki's doing some really good things too. And I think that's part of what's hooking me too. It's like, oh yeah, they're getting it. They're not only are you getting character development in both cases, but you're getting something that's going to be clearly far reaching.
Yeah. Like more something that's going to be further fleshed out later down the
Right,
line. But
that you
you're
can
seeing,
say,
you're
see the
seeing those
threads.
indications, of like, oh, whoa, this is way bigger. Like this
Right,
is going to get way bigger.
This is going to get way bigger, and it's going to be a big deal. So what ones have been for you?
For me, it was a toss-up between Dexter New Blood and The Good Place.
Okay.
For going into Dexter New Blood, I think one of the things that intrigued me off the bat about that sort of kind of reboot, I guess, was just that we were finally gonna get some resolution and some answers to the things that happened at the end of the original Dexter series. And that was the thing that first just really hooked me. But then just within the first couple of episodes, I was hooked in the sense of ooh, I'm really liking what they're doing with this, and I'm liking how it's framed in a much darker way than the original Dexter was. It was kind of more comedic in the original series of what was going on.
Yeah.
But in this show, it was way more serious and way more getting into the not justifying Dexter's actions through his fucked up psyche, but more exploring the fucked up psyche of this is just fucked up and you never should have been rooting for this character.
Yeah.
I
You're
really liked the idea of we went from kind of sympathizing with Dexter to he is a monster and we should not have ever
been siding
seen
with
him as a hero or anything like that.
Right.
And I really, really enjoyed that aspect of the show. And of course, Clancy Brown, who has been showing up in everything now.
Yeah.
He had an amazing performance in that show as well. But then with The Good Place, man, that was one of the first shows that I feel hooked me not only in the intrigue of where is this story going, right? Where is the resolution going to really be? But also just it consistently had a root to my funny bone. That show was just so hilarious to me.
Yeah.
And when it on its release schedule, it would only come out it was releasing like on a TV channel. I think it was NPC or NBC.
Right.
And it would air in the mornings. And so I specifically remember that on the final season of that show, I was getting up early like every morning and going down and watching it on the TV.
Oh,
It was just
interesting.
like it was one of the first like shows that in a while, ever since we kind of hit this like streaming age,
Hmm.
that like got me back sitting in front of the TV and like watching it just on a TV schedule, right?
Right.
Um, so that's one of the main reasons I picked that one. Especially just because, the story all around is just really good and like it ends in a really like wholesome and cool way. So, um, but yeah, those were the two ones that I picked.
So it's interesting that you bring up, first of all, kind of the streaming age things like that. So a Good Place, I ended up only watching it on streaming, so I
Mm,
got to binge it, so I didn't have to wait week to week
yeah.
and everything like that. But then also talking about the Dexter, one of the key things you talked about was being a reboot. So that was one of the ones I wanted to ask you about.
Mm.
What is so? It sounds like, at least in the case of Dexter, you were a big fan of the reboot. But what is your general feel about reboots?
I like reboots if it if it has it, because like I think I almost like reboots that are more kind of like continuations of the
Mm,
story,
yeah.
as opposed to like reboots that are like we're almost telling the same story again but just with like a new skin on it,
Mm,
right? Or like like new
hmm.
visuals to it. Like I like it way more when it's like a continuation of the story and there's like a purpose to that continuation and it feels like well rounded. I feel like reboots that are kind of like what we were talking about last week with the Nightmare on Elm Street
Hmm.
reboot. It's
Right.
like this is basically the same story just with a darker undertone and
Hmm.
with a new skin on it. Like everything just looks different, right?
Right.
And I don't like reboots when they're like that because it feels kind of I don't know if like divisive is the word or like
I to me, I think maybe it feels sort of cynical that all they're trying to do is do a cash grab
yeah,
like that.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like that's kind of the lens that it gets put through for me where it's
Hmm.
like if there's no real purpose to this other than just like making it look a little bit better and like
Hmm.
usually that's it. If the only real purpose is to make it look a little bit better or just different, then it's like yeah, you're kind of just cash grabbing at that point, right?
Right. Oh, it's funny though because I think there are examples where it was kind of look a little bit better, but it really worked. So one example, funny enough, is your boy Sam Raimi.
Mm,
So now it wasn't just a simple cash grab, but Evil Dead 2 was essentially the same story as Evil Dead 1. But
mm,
the reason he did it though was he went to a whole licensing rights issue for the first film. And so instead of just dealing with all that, he got a bigger budget and redid the first film and called it Evil
mm,
Dead 2,
mm,
right? And it really worked and it paid off and really kicked off the whole series and everything.
mm-hmm.
I also felt like the newer Evil Dead film, I really enjoyed that one,
Oh yeah.
right? And then I enjoyed Evil Dead Rise as well. So I think there's some success to be said on some of those things. But I do agree with you that like the Carrie reboot, I mean, and then like you said, like the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, the uh, first edition of the Halloween reboots
Mm,
didn't care for.
mm.
The Friday the 13th attempt at a reboot,
Oh man,
that
yeah.
was awful. It was
Yeah.
like, oh man, what are you doing? So there's definitely plenty of examples. But then again, like I talked about before, I enjoyed the Hellraiser reboot. I
Mm,
really thought
mhm.
that worked. I don't know. I don't think we can consider Predator to be a reboot. It's more of a prequel. So I think that was cool. And if rumor has it correct, I think the next one's going to be during I think World War II, maybe.
Interesting.
So I think that could be really interesting, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But the thing that seems to me that they'd really be better is if they did it like during the Vietnam or Korean War or something like that, something where it's more of a tropical setting to kind
Mm,
of match the pattern of the first film. I don't know, but
yeah.
I think a wartime setting would be really cool because
Mm.
I have all this death and devastation going on, and then you've got something going on that's undercurrent that people don't realize it's going on at the
Well,
same
yeah,
time.
and I mean, like, you get into World War II, you can literally have it be like there's a predator walking around in oh man, what's it called? That's like, like the main battlefield section of a war, like where
Oh, in
there's
the
just
trenches you're talking about?
like no man's land.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
just like you would just have a predator walking around no man's land where it's like no man is ever going to make it out of there to be able to tell the story of the
of it.
predator walking
Right.
around the battlefield,
Feel-
like just taking people out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is a really cool concept.
So yeah, so I think it can work, but there tends to be the fear that it is cash grab. But also, I think sometimes it is cool to see updated technology, even if it is the same story. I think the challenge for me tends to be: do they understand the heart of the story? What was the point of the story? If they really understood the heart and the point of the story, then the updated technology is cool to see.
Yeah, because then then it just becomes like a better way to tell the story, right?
Exactly.
Like rather than it just being a rehash of the story, it's like we're telling it better, than
Right,
it
because there's
originally
things that
was
maybe we
told.
couldn't do that I wanted to do, but now I
Exactly.
can, so that
Mhm.
makes it even better than before. So yeah, I agree with that. But I guess sort of still on the reboot thing slightly. So I don't know if you heard about this, but with the after the David Tennant specials for Doctor Who,
Mhm.
it's going to be quote season 1 of Doctor Who.
Yeah, well, and so I wonder what they mean by that because, Doctor Who is constantly doing this where, like, every time there's a new doctor, there's a new showrunner, and so the show kind of essentially remakes itself
Hmm.
in the same way
So
the
kind of like
doctor does.
reboots every time, right?
Exactly. And I'm wondering if that's kind of more what they mean or if it is going to be like this really huge jumping off point of like the character of the doctor is forever fundamentally changed and so that means that the show is forever fundamentally
Oh,
changed of
interesting.
like we're having to restart because it's like a new story or like a new character that we're
A new journey we're doing.
yeah
So
and
I kind of hope it's like what you're describing.
mm,
Reality is, I think it's just a business decision.
mm.
So what's happening is it's going to start streaming on Disney Plus,
Oh yeah, and
right?
I saw that too, and that's one thing I have faith in the show still,
Okay,
just because it's Russell T Davies that's coming back, and like
right,
he was the one that initially did kind of the reboot of Doctor Who, right,
right,
with Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor,
right.
and I feel like that really worked. Like I feel like he did a really good job there. The issue that now though is like being that Disney is involved in the mix,
Hmm.
I'm kind of scared of like some of the more serious themes
Hmm.
leaving Doctor Who.
Well, because
So,
Eccleston was very serious. He was like one of the
well,
most serious
yeah, and not
doctors.
only was Eccleston serious, but like, then directly after Davies' run, you had Stephen Moffat, which just brought like, just all pretty much all of his episodes were dark.
Hmm. Yep.
um, and I honestly like, and I feel like it's different with every Doctor Who fan, but I feel
Right.
like some of Moffat's episodes,
Hmm.
in my personal opinion, is just like some of the best Who to ever be done or
Mm.
written. Um, and a lot of those episodes are the ones that I'm saying like have this darker theme to them and like
Right.
have the doctor exploring and talking about really like deep and complex topics. And I'm kind of scared that with Disney entering the mix that it's going to kind of head more in a direction of like and like Doctor Who has always been whimsical and like
Hmm. Hmm.
very there's some
More
moments in it,
lighthearted.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's some moments in it that are more lighthearted or kind
Hmm.
of like kiddie in the way that it gets communicated,
Hmm.
but I don't want that to become the entire show,
Right.
right?
Right.
um and so I'm that's the main thing I'm like worried about when it comes to that. But I feel like the choice of the new doctor, from what I've seen of his work, he seems like a good fit and like
Yeah,
he
for what
seems
I've seen behind the scenes, it looks pretty good
yeah.
too. But it's interesting. So I think for me, because I'm from the Tom Baker era of
Hmm.
Doctor Who, and a big part of that is even though it was kind of whimsy and silly, it was a tool he used. So he was sort of like a Jack Sparrow. He
Mm.
always knew more than what everybody thought he knew,
Hmm.
and he used that as like I said as a tool so that people underestimated him.
Hmm.
And I think Matt Smith did that a
Matt
bit
Smith,
too,
yeah,
right?
perfect
Where he
example.
seemed goofy and everything, but he really knew what he was doing at
Oh
all
yeah, and
times.
like in the moments when and that's some of my favorite moments of Matt Smith's Doctor is like in the moments. And I don't know if it was the same with Tom Baker because I haven't seen too much of him. I really want to like go back and rewatch his stuff, but um, you know, there was kind of like the thing of like whenever the doctor's around his companions, it's like that whimsy kind of
Mm-hmm.
facade, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then whenever he's in direct confrontation with some sort of opposing force or some
Right.
sort of like entity that is like just like pure negativity in whatever form,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just the doctor in that thing,
Mm-hmm.
just pure seriousness. Like
Right.
he just switches, like the facade completely drops, and he
Right.
just becomes this all-knowing being of like, and it's just so cool in moments like
Right,
that.
exactly.
Like
And
I
I
just
like that.
love
I
it.
love that when they flip it and it's like, I know what's going on and I know I'm
Exactly.
going to destroy you. And the friends show up like, oh, we're just having a good old conversation, we're just hanging out as friends,
Yeah.
So it's like, I agree with you 100%. Okay, so that said, let's go to our regular agenda. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, because it seems like you're a fan of it, and I personally hate it. I think a lot of people in my generation are not fans of it, but the whole found footage shaky cam thing.
Hmm.
So you seem to be more in favor of it. Tell me
Yeah.
about that.
Well, so I think it's about its applications, right? Like for me, I only tend I feel like the only thing that I've ever seen, or like the only genre that I've ever seen shaky cam in, that hasn't all the time communicated as silly or just like, like kind of an eyesore,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is horror,
Right,
right? I
right.
feel like horror is like really one of the only applications that shaky cam like really has a utilization. So like one of the main reasons I like it is it kind of goes into like the fear of the unknown, right?
Okay.
And kind of that idea of like when there's a monster in horror that isn't getting shown as much,
Mm-hmm.
and like you don't really know the capabilities of whatever this thing is.
Right.
I really like when there's like when you have moments where like you could have a character like whoever's filming like facing the monster, and then they get freaked out and start running away and like
Mm,
facing back and forth every now and then.
you're
I
right.
feel like moments like that are really, they can really work because depending on how whatever film or whatever show has set up this monster or like
Mm-hmm.
this entity or whatever, you as a viewer could be sitting there going like having kind of a moment of like just pure tensity, like while that character's
Mm-hmm.
running away, because you're like, man, what are you doing? Like look back at it, like what, we don't
Right.
know what this thing does, like what are you doing running,
Right.
like
Why'd you turn your back
why'd
on
you
it?
turn your back on it, like all of, like just that kind of pure, those little moments of panic while you're watching this character run away or
Mm-hmm.
whatever from whatever it is. I feel like that's like the best utilization of it because
Okay.
like it's almost like the camera itself is communicating that chaos as well. Like the
Uh,
camera itself is communicating just like how freaked out whoever is filming
mm-hmm.
is, like, it's like the visual personification of that. Um but I feel like that's the points in movies or shows where it really works. Other than that, I tend to have a hard time like following it, especially when it comes to like action. I cannot stand shaky cam.
Oh
Like
yeah.
whenever there's like an action sequence going on or like a
Like the
fight
Taken
sequence,
movies and stuff like that.
yeah, like, and it's just like shaky everywhere.
And
There's
it's
so much going
cutaways.
on, a
Yeah.
bunch of cutaways. Yeah, I cannot stand that. But yeah, like you're saying with like the found footage stuff, if it's done well, I
Mm.
feel like it works really well. But because you always have your kind of stinkers in that sense too, right? Where
Right.
it's like, too much of the monster has been shown, or we already know too many capabilities of it, or
Mm.
maybe the monster doesn't really look that great, right? Like maybe it
Right.
looks kind
Doesn't
of
work.
corny, right?
Yeah.
And so like even though the person filming's really freaked out by this and shaking the camera, you're just kind of sitting there like, man, you're running away from someone in cosplay right now.
Right.
Right?
Right. I think what happens, I have a hard time with the logistics of it more often than not.
Mm.
So it's like Cloverfield did pretty good with it and seemed to have a pretty good logical continuity for why it was being filmed. There's one episode or one of the stories in one of the VHSs where it made the most sense because what it was is he had a camera on his
The glasses, yeah.
Exactly. So then
Yeah.
it made perfect sense that it was all his head motions and things like that, and that he didn't stop filming. Because to me, if you're in that situation, holding up the camera,
Yeah, why are you going like
right? And my point seems to be proven by whenever you see like these, home movie things like that, where somebody does something like they fall off the slide, stuff like that. The person holding the camera, more often than not, puts it down to go help. And if some monster's chasing me, I'm not holding up the camera. Like, where am I going? Now, some of them, kind of explain because it's a dark scenario and they're using the light from the camera. But again, I'm not holding the camera to my face to use the light from the camera. I'm probably holding it like this and running. So you could possibly make the argument there. But more often than not, it's like clearly it's a whole crew with cameras, and they're splicing it together to make this happen, and I just don't buy it.
Yeah, well, and I feel like there's movies that make make a good point as to kind of like with the VHS thing you were mentioning, where it's like there's some things I've seen where like they make a good point as to why this person is constantly filming.
Right.
And I even like the excuse, and this is usually the excuse I just write off in my head whenever something is like that part isn't explained.
Right.
Usually the way that I just end up looking at it is like this person is like, at the end of the day, even though they're freaked out, they want to get whatever they're seeing on camera.
They're trying to capture it
so that they have proof. Either so that they have proof or so that they can like upload this online later and get hundreds of millions of views, right? Like kind of looking at it through that lens of like, even though this human is horrified right now, their baser instinct is telling them you need proof of this,
or you need a record of this.
You need a record of this so that you can pop off, or you need proof of this so that you can show it to all your friends, or whatever reason that would be, right?
I could kind of see that, especially with your generation.
With my generation,
I really think my generation would be like, screw the camera, I'm out of here. So if I'm going to turn my back on it, I ain't worried about the camera. You can have a camera. Maybe I'll throw the camera at you, baby. But yeah. So, at any rate, so let's get into our spoilers. It's the spoiler time. Here's your warning. People. So the season finale of Gen V. Wow. Man. Talk about some twists. I mean, my prediction was Kate was going to be the big bad, so that kind of manifested. It was kind of really cool that we finally officially have some, quote, super villains running around, right? At least the ones that survive. The special guests, so Homelander coming in, which that twist totally got me off guard. And they've been setting it up all this time, but I did not see him turning on Marie. When he asked the question, "What kind of animal are you?" I thought it was one. So my boss likes to do this thing where he asks just off the wall questions during interviews, and he might ask something like that, like, "What kind of animal are you?" Just to see what type of response you give, so you can get an idea of your personality. So I thought that's what he was doing. I didn't know he was going to turn on her, and the big twist is that they were going to make her and her crew the bad guys.
Unfortunately, just because of how fucked up Homelander is, I knew as soon as he showed up, I was like, are they really about to do this? So one of my predictions going into this episode was that somebody was going to get killed, right? Like somebody in the main cast. I didn't really know who,
but somebody was going to die.
Somebody was going to die. And so, after all of what had occurred and then he showed up, I was like, oh, this is it. Like, they're really doing this. Because, Homelander showing up, even though they're even playing, the Superman arrival music of, he's about to make everything okay. It's no, this guy is about to make everything worse. Everything is just going to get...
They totally set it up like he's into just the level the field and make sure everybody's good. Yep.
Yeah. Oh man, and so one thing I'm kind of curious about, I guess we could kind of work backwards. What do you think? So just before Homelander showing up, what do you think Kate was about to push Jordan to do. So
I
like
I
they
think
had her walk up and then her arm got popped, right?
right, because
But
Marie
like
pops her arm. I think she was totally going to turn Jordan on Marie, and then, which would have perfect irony, right? That the
mm,
two lovers would have to fight each other,
hmm,
right? And then
yeah.
she could either finish or continue on her massacre, or she could escape, one or the other. But I
Mm,
think she probably would have taken out the board right there, everybody in the helicopter, and then she probably would have left. So her
hmm,
and Sam would have left and been off out into the wild. So I think that's what she was planning to do, because essentially no one was going to stop her but Marie. So
yeah.
that's the one thing she needed to get out of her way. So once she removed that obstacle, she was going to be unstoppable. And
Hmm,
you think about Marie's powers, but also her love for Jordan, she would have been in a dilemma. And I think
yeah.
and it had been an easy push. She could have easily pushed into Jordan's head that's Kate in front of you.
Hmm. Yeah, it's man, it's so hard because like they've made the confliction uh um of like, even just the whole reasoning of as to why Sam and Kate are doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They've made it so like they've done a masterful job at like making the viewer conflicted, right? Like while I was watching that whole episode, it was
Mm-hmm.
like, yes, I support going against Vought. And
Right.
yes, I support like, kind of giving these douchebags what they deserve that have been like literally putting the soups in a lower spot, like
Mm-hmm.
kind of lessening them to just
Making them into
animals.
products. Yep.
Right, yeah. Like I totally agree with that philosophy. But like then when it gets to releasing the people from the woods and like just having them go kill any human, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh man, like this is so bad because it's like even releasing the soups from the woods I sort of agree with because it's like
Mm-hmm.
these
But then you
people.
see that they're crazy though.
Yeah, but then it's like the problem is like, would it have just been better to actually have kept them down there because they're so disconnected from humanity
Right.
that like, would they go back into the world and like, even if they're not told to just go out and aimlessly kill humans, are they just going to start doing
Doing
that
that.
because they
Well,
don't
because the
know any
one, she just
better?
comes out and she goes, "Are you a human?" and just starts killing people
Yeah,
indiscriminately. And it's funny because you're spot on, because they did it on purpose, because even though they showed that and they showed them just indiscriminately killing humans, then you had social media guy who stops one with the sound thing and then blows its head up,
yeah,
right? And it's like, so clearly humans aren't the good guys. So it's like so many layers of gray
yeah.
that it's hard to decide. But it's interesting. So they are in the comic. They're originally a parody of the X-Men, and the
Oh
whole point
yeah,
of the X-Men was it was basically the social injustice. So it was basically a race war thing that they were doing in the X-Men,
yeah.
which the
This
movies have never quite captured, and they
Yeah,
did a beautiful
the
job of
closest,
capturing that.
yeah, the closest the X-Men movies probably came to something like this was Last Stand, probably.
Closest, yeah.
But then like it's just so interesting how you had Kate basically doing all of the things that Magneto would be doing, right? But
Exactly. Kate
like,
was the Magneto, but it
yeah,
was basically Kate. Kate was Magneto and Jean Grey combined, is what you
mm-hmm,
basically got there,
yeah,
right? So Magneto's cause, but Jean Grey's powers.
mm-hmm, yeah. Yeah, so one other thing, we're just kind of bouncing around
It's all
in the
good. It's all
episode,
good.
but so do you think so what one of the things that's like a storyline that they go pretty deep into in the comics is Homelander essentially building his own army of soups, right?
Mm,
So like Homelander eventually building an army of soups that are just all radicalized and just all believe that like they're kind of this like higher race
just the
than
next
humanity.
evolution of humanity. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So do you think that like ultimately they're building towards that? Um and what do you think it was that Homelander kind of used as like a what's the word for it? Kind of like a persuader
Hmm.
for Sam and Kate. right?
To convince them that Sam and Kate were the good
to like
guys.
really radicalize them, because you know Kate and Sam would both, like, even though they're quote unquote the new guardians of Godolkin,
Mhm.
it doesn't entirely make sense because they specifically hate Vought, right? Like they, like, especially Sam,
Mhm.
like he would just have a full on vendetta against anything Vought,
Right.
and it would be hard for me to believe that he would kind of like go under the wing of Homelander when he is literally the face of Vought, right?
So I think it's going to be easier than you're thinking. So
Mm.
when Kate took out his emotions and he said himself, "I'm empty now." So even all that hate and everything's gone. So all it is all he's left is with the idea that soups are better than humans.
Mm.
So he doesn't have the conflict of the emotions about that you're killing humans. All that's gone, but also all the anger and everything about Vought specifically, I think would be gone with that.
Even about Luke, because if you think about it, Luke is talking to him as like his subconscious,
Right, like his Jiminy Cricket.
but then as soon as Kate touches him, Luke walks off screen,
Right, and he's like, "Oh, screw it,
and then
I'm
we
gone."
don't see Luke for the rest of
Right,
the
so
episode.
he's gone. That little voice in your head is totally gone now.
Yeah.
But the thing about being human, even a superhuman, something can replace that little voice. So Homelander very easily can replace that little voice and start from what Sam already believes, that soups are superior to humans, and here's what we need to do to get the new world order in place, and you're key to that. So I need you to
Yeah.
play along, play ball, and this is what I'm going to build out. And then leveraging Kate's abilities, he could get any number of soups basically on board, but also using Kate's abilities, he could get the board on board. See, so Kate
Yeah.
is the key here still. So I think he could very quickly leverage Kate, leverage Sam, but basically tell Sam, "I need you to lay low." Leverage Kate to any resistors. Kate could go take care of that for him, and then have Kate lay low, right? And now he's in complete control. So Kate's key. I think the funny thing is, it's almost like having that loaded gun that you don't know how to fully control. So I think Kate may still be key to Homelander's downfall as well.
Yeah, like it's like it's kind of like those really old like flintlock pistols where
Right.
it's like it could easily eviscerate whatever's standing in front of you, but it could also easily take your arm off.
Right,
because it
explode right back
backfires.
at you.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that they kind of even showed that with Marie blowing up Kate's arm, because Kate never thought, even though she was about to send Jordan to basically try to kill Marie, she never thought Kate would use her powers in a way like that against her.
Yeah.
So the gun blew up back at her as she was about to fire it. So think about it, because that's all she could do. She didn't have any time to say to Jordan, look out. And clearly Kate's powers, so Jordan being invincible or the sonic powers, whatever, really don't do much against Kate as long as she can touch you just for a second. As soon as she gets that touch, it doesn't matter. So it wouldn't be like Jordan could go, "Whoa," and get away in time. So she really had no choice. So yeah, I think the next season of Boys is going to be very interesting. But I've been watching quite a few YouTubers and things like that, and I'm coming along to thinking, I don't know that Homelander is going to make it out. I think this is the beginning of the end.
Yeah.
And
I don't know.
I actually think not only Homelander's not going to make it out, but I don't think we already know Billy Butcher's dying.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so I think this is going to be the end of those characters, but I think they've done a great job of essentially starting to introduce some new characters to start filling in those spots. Right? Because it'd be very easy for Sam to step in now that he's empty and he's just waiting for people to fill in stuff for him to essentially become the new Homelander. Right?
Oh, man.
And be the new leader of the Seven, and he's an empty shell.
Yeah.
So they can mold him to be whatever they want him to be. Right? And then he's got Kate at his side, and always kind of this loose cannon, this risk thing would be the Kate thing and stuff like that. But then you've got Marie and crew as the boys to try to stop them knowing what those two are really up to.
Yeah.
See, so I think they are, and so I think Gen V is setting up the next generation of this conflict.
Oh yeah, it's so cool.
Yep.
Two other things that I wanted to mention, maybe before we close out. Uh, Marie, Marie, and quite possibly the rest of those four have to be like insanely resilient,
I
unless
know.
unless Homelander blasted them specifically to just daze them, or like specifically to just incapacitate them. I don't know how they survived a Homelander blast,
Well,
because
I think
like
he only blasts Marie because that's what the comment they said that because they were all impressed that she survived the blast from him.
yeah,
I think he probably just basically knuckle punched the rest of them and knocked them out.
just conked them on the
Right,
head.
exactly. As they were sitting there stunned, looking at Marie, just went boop, 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 boop. And they all right. So I think that's all he did to them, and then they all woke up there, and they were all like a little dazed and confused, but they're all thinking Marie got a hole in her, and then they're like, "Whoa, she doesn't have a hole in her." So I think that is setting up another part of her blood powers is that she does have probably even better than average regeneration.
Mm,
And I think it goes to what you were talking about, where you were talking about potentially putting heads back together and stuff like that. At
mm.
least in her own,
Yeah, in
you
her
know,
own body.
in her
Yeah.
own body, and just instinctively, it would mend itself like that. Because she's
Mm.
not been in any real situations where we've seen her get hurt, really hurt.
Same with Newman as well. Like
Right.
we haven't really seen
See,
Newman like
get really hurt.
yeah.
And you notice that like even when Newman and Homelander were kind of at conflict with each other, she never truly seemed to be afraid of him.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right.
She still had kind of an attitude of like you could try to do whatever you want right now. Like I'm still gonna
Right.
be
So I
okay.
think that's what they're hinting at is that Newman knows, and Marie's will ultimately find out that it's in some way they're indestructible.
Mm.
Right. But also, I mean, it's kind of been an undercurrent with Gen Z, though. I mean, dude gets his junk blown up, and then the next episode he's just walking along, just fine and good. And then even like in the first episode where Golden Boy was doing the tournament thing, and didn't he rip dude's arms off?
Yeah, he ripped dude's arms off.
And then he's like,
Yeah.
just you'll be okay, shake it off. Next time you'll do better. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you ripped off his arms.
At least with that guy, they showed them reattaching his arms. So like at the very least,
You knew that guy had that ability.
yeah, like we could think that like he works kind of the same as like that dude from Suicide Squad that like, detaches his floating arms.
That was hilarious. So
Yeah.
at any rate,
Um,
so yeah, I think that's what they're hinting at is that she has some really heightened regeneration abilities,
mm,
and the rest didn't get the beams, so they didn't experience it.
yeah. Yeah, and then the one other thing that like just one other thing I wanted to throw in was like just kind of how like sad and kind of how much of like a narrative it is too that like in a school of superheroes where the staff like that are human
Mm-hmm.
start getting murdered, none of like we didn't see, besides like the main cast of like four that we've been following,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't see any of the other superheroes try to help or like try to like none of them acted heroic
Yeah.
in any way. Like every
Right.
other hero that we were shown was like either freaking out because they lost their Wi-Fi or freaking out because like they were just hiding rather than like
Right.
trying to do anything.
Right.
And like it was just really interesting to me that like it was showing of the fact that like these specific like soups in
Mhm.
this school have been so sheltered and
Mhm.
so like like
Programmed.
they just programmed, and they just do not understand like how to actually approach conflict,
Mhm.
that whenever conflict arises they just go back to like baser human instincts of just like hiding and freaking out about
Mhm.
things that don't actually really matter. Like,
Right. And not stepping up and running towards the screaming.
exactly.
Like they always say, the hero runs towards the screaming while everybody else is running away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That's a very good point. I didn't even, until you said that, I didn't even really think about it. But no one else seemed to step up. No one else seemed
that
to
kind
try
of
to help.
Yeah, and it kind of applies into the idea of like, those are soups that would very easily be able to be radicalized and like kind of
Mhm.
adopted into Homelander's army, because like he would just be able to show them, you can be completely unfiltered.
Well, and they already planted the seed for that, because with Newman's town hall, where the soup started, they got into a whole fight. And there, see, that was the interesting thing, because in that town hall, you did have a few soups that were kind of defending the humans, and then you had the soups that were like, humans must die, right? And they all started getting conflicted with each other, and then the humans were kind of caught in the middle. But no one went too extreme, right?
Yeah.
But it's so when the things really popped off, both sides kind of just boned out.
Yeah,
right?
like everybody just kind of like fleed, or like, and it was just kind of sad. It was like, damn, like
this whole school building, quote, superheroes that were
exactly
super worthless.
Like it's literally like seeing the personification of what Shetty was talking about, where it's like, this school was never made to develop superheroes. It was made to study superheroes and
figure out ways to stop them.
Yeah, and like it's like showing how like these soups are like, rather than like being heroic, they kind of like regress to the same sort of behavior of something that's getting studied, right? Like just fear
Baser
and hiding
instinct.
away in a hole, right?
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting to me that like they showed that.
Well, I wonder if it's also kind of a comment on society that you got people that are in like these Ivy League schools, these real high-end prestige schools that are ultimately not adding value to society, right? When push comes to shove, all they're doing is what generations have done before and what generations theoretically might do after, but they're not individuals that are going to make a difference.
Not really taking the charge. Yeah.
Right. Even though they have these advantages, superpowers being the advantage, when it comes down to it, push comes to shove, or you said they go to their base instinct and they're really not trying to utilize their advantage to help others. And in this case, save others' lives, literally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's awesome. Okay. Well, I guess we should wrap it up. So hopefully our new technology worked out better today. Video time, audio, it's going to be interesting to see. But thank you again, Mr. Dante.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. And this is this week's Mind the Nerdish Gap. And we will see you again next week.
See you around, everybody.
Bye.
Orders, Commander.
How many times must I tell you? Mind the nerdish gap!
We are